Good morning, adventuresses. Welcome to the show dedicated to travel the world on horseback. I'm Ute, and together with my partner Heather, I'm happy to welcome you to another exciting Q&A episode. So Heather, we have two questions today which we received in the Facebook groups. Thank you so much for that. We're always happy to get some questions there and always happy to put in a little research and answer them for you. So which question do we have today?
Well, the first question that we have is about the cost of rides. What is kind of some of the deciding factors? Why are some are more expensive than others? And kind of what is exactly is all included. Now, from my own experience, I've done a few of these rides. And they've ranged, depending on the length, really determines sometimes your price and what all you get. But I'm going to let you answer as an outfitter. All of the expenses that go in on the outfitter side. So you'll be able to give some good feedback on, when you determine what the cost for your week package or half day ride, whatever it is, how you determine that.
Oh yeah, well, right. First of all, let me say that I don't think horse riding holidays aren't so super expensive. I think there's far more expensive holidays, like if you go on a cruise ship or if you do some other activity-based vacations. Because one of the things we always have to keep in mind here is the horses. So our one biggest factor of expense is, of course, the horsekeeping. Now, any good outfitter would have their own horses, and they would need as many horses they need for their tours, for the trails, for their kind of average or kind of maximum size, actually. So like we do usually groups of maximum of 10. That means I need 10 horses for the guest. Plus, if I have a group of that big size, I would need 2 extra horses for the guides, because then we would probably ride with 2 guides or at least take 1 spare. So that brings me to a minimum number of 12 horses. Plus we need 1 in spare, because you never know, there could always be one, injured or sick or whatever, right? So I need a minimum of 13, rather 14 to 15 horses to be on the safe side. So we all know that horsekeeping is expensive, even if you can produce your own food, which probably not everyone can, but everyone, most of the stables try to produce some food on their own land and their own place to keep the horses, so they don't need to pay anything for the horse keeping. But you need staff, you cannot, most of the people cannot manage 15 horses on, just as one or as a family business. So usually you need at least 1 person extra. You need a good guide if you cannot do it yourself, because, let's face it, we can't cut ourselves into 2 or 3 people, even if I would love to do that sometimes, because there's so many things. Now, if you look at the trails, right, we go from A to B to C to D. So every night we camp in a different place most of the times. We have a couple of places we do 2 nights, and sometimes we stay overnight at hotels, which takes a lot of the work away from us. But that means we have to pay for the hotels. If we do camping, we have to transport the whole stuff, the whole equipment, the tents, everything. We have to transport it from A to B to C to D. We need to cook. We need to make food for everyone. That means we need a cook. We need a driver. We need people to set up camp. We need, of course, somebody to go with the group. We need somebody to take care of the horses. We have to take the horse food with us. So there's just so many expenses. One of our biggest, horses obviously is the biggest expense, because most of the businesses are seasonal. That means we have our season's around about 7 months a year in normal years. This year's COVID, so it doesn't count. But usually we have a 7-month season and a 5 month of off season. But we keep our horses all year round, even through the off season. So off season doesn't mean the horse doesn't need care. It doesn't need to be fed. All these things continue. We still have to give the horses their daily food. We have to check. I take off the shoes for these 5 months, so they don't need the farrier usually in that period, but I have to check the hooves myself. They need the vaccinations, they need the deworming, they need care, and all these things that continues to run even in the months they do not work. So if you go on a horse riding vacation, you always have to think that you are basically financing your horse for 12 months for the owner, right? for the outfitter. Then there's a big amount of money goes into transportation. Fuel has become expensive or is quite expensive here. That means every time we truck the horses, every time we truck the equipment, every time we run our car to go to places, we have to put diesel in the cars and the trucks and everything. That costs money. Everything we bring, of course, we want to offer high quality food. We need to provide breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like most outfitters, most of these trails, you get a full pension, which is included in the price. So you get a good amount of food because horse riding makes you hungry. It makes you thirsty. That means we have to see that we bring enough water for everyone during the day. We have to make sure that everyone has sufficient good quality food. So yeah, that just is expensive, and we have to bring everything. We have to take everything around. I mean, we buy locally as much as we can. We offer local seasonal food, which is the healthiest, I think, which is the best, I think. But nevertheless, a lot of the things we provide them we are not able to get them somewhere in the countryside. Like, you know, if people want to have their jam for breakfast or their cheese or maybe their Nutella for breakfast, we have to bring that from Udaipur. We have to, if there's special beverages they want to have, we have to bring that. And so there's a lot of stuff. It goes right down to the campfire. So if you want to have a campfire every night, we need wood for that. So usually we have our own trees at the farm, and during the rainy season, usually there's a tree of ours falls down. Most of the years, last year we had a lot because we had flood at the farm. So we had a couple of trees which fell down. So that means we have to cut the wood, we have to store the wood somewhere where it can dry, and then we have to take it along. If we don't have sufficient wood, we have to buy it and again supply it to the people, you know, just for a nice little campfire. So there's a lot of cost involved. If people stay overnight in hotels, we have to pay the hotels. We have to make sure that they get good food, that they get good accommodation. We have to send the guide with them, so we have to make sure the guide also get accommodation there and stuff like that. So yeah, it is an expensive way of traveling because of the horses. Also, you can't just go and camp everywhere. You need to have places to camp. Sometimes we have to pay for these places. Some places belong to us or belong to friends of us. We don't need to pay, but there's a lot of costs involved. And if you consider what is included in these rides is that you have your own horse you ride, which should be well cared for, which should be well fed, which should be, you know, having proper shoes, proper equipment and everything. You get food, you usually get full board, sometimes including drinks, sometimes even included. You get accommodation, overnight stay. Some are basic, most are basic, and usually in the very, very expensive rides, your accommodation is much better because it's just very expensive. So usually that is one thing. If you are purchasing very basic accommodations, you can save a little bit on these trips just by choosing one trip which has like a tented accommodation or accommodation in kind of basic hostels or shelters or hotels rather than very expensive ones. But other than that, I don't really see a way to save a lot of money on normal horseback trails. So what's your experience? How much money have you usually spent on your horseback vacations?
You know, it really, obviously the length determines the cost. But you're probably in that, between $1,000 and $2,000 US for them. Now, the international rides I've done have been in that, $1,500-$1,800 US range. For like a 7-night trip, 6 days of riding. It does include, and when you break it down, that's including the horse, all of the tack, all of your transportation between, if where you get off your horse and where you actually sleep sometimes isn't the same place. So there has to be that car ride into the hotel, all your meals. One thing that is the little bit different in North America versus in Europe. In Europe, everybody drinks wine. Like the wine is like water. The bottle of wine is always on the table. Whereas in North America, alcohol does tend, in Canada anyways, alcohol is definitely more expensive. So alcohol would always be an add-on. Whereas lots of times in Europe, your coffee, tea, and wine is included with all, with not breakfast. Well, I'm sure if you wanted it for breakfast, they'd probably give it to you, but so those kind of things. But, I think budgeting for, that 1,500 to 2,000 American, so that's probably close to, the same in euro, for the quality, because you're the old saying of you get what you pay for. Sometimes those cheap is cheap. When you're galloping on a beach, I want to know that my cinch or my girth isn't going to break, that my bridle is going to stay intact, and when I ask for the woe, I get the woe. And sometimes, if you spend, and sometimes there are bargains to be found, but a lot of times cheap is cheap. You get what you pay for. There's a lot to be said for safety, and if I have to pay an extra $100, $200 to be safe, it's worth your money. You've spent quite a bit of money just to get to the destination. If you're traveling from North America to Europe or to Asia, or to Australia, it's not cheap. And to go all that way and get hurt because you cheaped out on poor equipment, or maybe not a sure-footed horse. So those are the things to take into consideration. Your one thing when you're looking for a tour operator or an outfitter, is that they are registered with a tourism organization. I know the UK has one, Canada has Canada, US, there's lots of different, and when you go on these websites, you can usually, you scroll to the bottom, they're going to tell you which organization they're registered with. And that's always usually a good indication of the quality you're going to get.
Yeah, most of the time. One big thing you were talking about here is the training of the horse, and that's one thing I probably forgot. See, if we have, as I said, we have our stable of 15 horses, and these 15 horses all, either they were born at my place or we bought them. So if you kind of produce your own horses by kind of have the one or the other mare have a foal or filly, and then keep it and raise it and ride it eventually, we are looking at a horse which is not bringing you any money for 3 years minimum, rather 4 years, you can say, to be on the safe side, because you're not really start riding until about 3.5, and it will not really be fit to go out on long trails, which is tough for the horses as well. The horses need to have certain fitness, as you said, a certain training in order to go out there. So there's actually, if I would count my working hours in our business and then how much money we get out at the end of the month, I think it's going to be a very poor bargain for me, because I spend so much time with the horses, and I usually train every day. Of course, you don't train a horse every day, but the younger horses, they need regular training, regular riding. The older ones, they need a little bit of training sessions in between to keep them supple and fit, and also to just make sure that, as you said, that a woe is a woe and a hoe is a hoe. Mm-hmm. So it is important to keep them a little bit on the trained side, that they know, they know their job. I have a couple of horses I really rely on, and even there I do a little bit of ground training very regularly, more for the suppleness and for just testing how easy they still are, how soft they still are, because I want my horses to be soft and supple. So I want my riders, after when they do the safaris with us, I want them all to say, wow, that's such a great horse. Can I take it home with me? When they say that in the end, I'm very happy, because then I know that my work, is appreciated. So there's a lot of training going into these trail horses. People sometimes say, it's just a trail horse. What does it have to know? Well, it has to be good in every kind of situation, because out there on the trail, we encounter cows, in India, we encounter camels, elephants, sheep, we encounter goats, we encounter lots of people, sometimes kids screaming, running, shouting, jumping up to the horses. We encounter cars, we encounter trucks, we encounter buses, sometimes buses honking, sometimes trucks just, passing us within just a half meter of distance between us and the horses. So they need to be used to all of that. You know, I cannot go out riding there with a horse who would like totally get scared or, you know, run away or bolt or, you know, get really freaked out, because that is potentially dangerous for my riders. In a group situation, it's always easier. I cannot say, okay, the horse will learn it on the go. The horse needs to learn it before. We have water crossings. That means the horse needs to be used to water. We have, sometimes we have hills. The horses need to be sure-footed going up and down the mountains. So that's all situations you have to teach the horse beforehand, before you take them on trails out like that. You can't expect your guests to train your horses for you. That does not work. So you can imagine how much of training goes in the horses. Another thing you said, you rightly pointed out, is of course the traveling to go to a destination. Now that is probably the same whether you go there for horse riding holiday or whether you go there for couch surfing or for backpacking. You have to buy your train ticket or your air ticket, or you have to do all these, you know, buy your visas or get your visas and all these things. But of course there is the potential of saving a bit of money by doing, or by kind of booking your tickets early. I usually realize that is the better option rather than hoping for a last minute option, because you can get lucky, but rarely so. So it's always good to book your tickets well in advance while they still have cheap seats available. Maybe look at different ways of getting to a place, maybe not travel the direct way, but traveling via another destination. Do a garbled flight or something like that. So you can save a little bit money here, but well, as you said, you have to get to the place if you want to ride there, and depends where you want to go. If you want to go to Australia from Europe or Canada, it just is far, and it just costs you what it costs you. Yeah,
Yes.
so that much for the topic about the cost. Now, do you have any tips on what can we do to maybe bring the costs down a little bit? Do you have anything there?
Well, you know, if sometimes when you look at the pricing, they'll have like the low season, shoulder season, high season. You know, if you can avoid traveling at the high season time, you know, high season tends to be, you know, usually anytime kids are out of school, summer holidays, those type of things. You know, if you have the opportunity to travel in that shoulder season, that can save you money. Sometimes the low season, it's a catch-22, right? It's a low season, not as many people are traveling, but it could also mean that it's a little bit rainier, or it's, you know, the weather might not be as good, because still you're going on holidays. You want it to be, you know, you want to enjoy your ride. You know, it's your vacation time. You work hard for your money that you pay for these holidays. So you want to have a good time. So that is something, you know, looking at those different seasonalities. Something that you mentioned about flights, you know, waiting for seat sales, or you know, booking early. You know, airlines are, you know, they sell so many seats at one price, and then once those go, then they move up the rate. You know, the back part, you know, in economy, they might have 200 people, but, you know, they have sold 20 different fare categories, and you're all getting the same, you know, we're all getting the same service. We're all getting, you know, the same seat. But you may have paid $100 or $500 more than me, depending on when you book it. So that is something that you can save money. Sometimes if, you know, finding a traveling companion, so you're getting the double rate versus the single supplement. Some places will have that. Some places will offer a single share, that if you are willing to share with someone, then that can save you a little bit of money. Now, not always is that ideal. You know, not everybody wants to share with a stranger. But, you know, those are things to take into consideration.
Yeah, exactly. Also, sometimes what you can do is, if you have more time, you can actually go for a kind of help versus, you know, a bit of a cheaper rate on safaris and rides. Of course, that doesn't work for a person who has like 2 weeks of a holiday or 3 weeks of a holiday a year. But if you have, like, you know, if you're just finished your studies and you have some time off and you have a couple of months off and you want to travel, you can always check if some of the great riding places need a helper, need somebody to do some of the basic chores, and in exchange give you a living or board, or maybe a bit of some cheaper rates on the safaris. So that's also sometimes worthwhile. Same thing is sometimes there's explorationary rides which have not been tested before. They introduced new, so sometimes they offer you special introduction rates for that. And of course, last minute, like that's what I do as well. If I see that I only have like 3 or 4 riders on a ride and I would like to have maybe 2 or 3 more, I offer a bit of a last minute rate. I say, hey guys, is there still anyone interesting? Are you, able to come on a short notice? I have still 2 spaces I want to sell for a little bit less. So usually you can say 10 to 15, sometimes 20% less, depends a little on the outfitter. So that is always an option if you can travel on short notice.
Well, those are some great tips. Now, the next question that we received was on, and I just pulled it up here. So when traveling overseas or to a new destination, would you rather have half-day rides and then fill your time with other activities versus a week-long with various trails? What's kind of the ideal number? Well, I have done both a based stay and the point-to-point rides. Now, when the rides that I've gone on, it's been me and my girlfriends going on a ride versus traveling with my spouse or my children. There's so many variables that come into play when looking at the length of the ride that you want to do, whether it's an afternoon or long rides. If you're traveling with your spouse, and you're gone every day from 9 till 5, that makes it an awfully long holiday for them sitting by themselves, where that's where the afternoon rides come in handy, where you can do a half-day ride maybe in the morning, and then in the afternoon do for example, in Italy, there's some places that do lovely wine tastings or a pasta making class kind of thing. So those are some of the things to take into consideration when determining long ride, short ride, half day, week long ride. Something else that's really important is your rider fitness. Can you do a 6-day ride, 200 kilometers physically? Yes, you are sitting, you're sitting on a horse. However, if you have long stretches of cantering and you're in the 2-point position, you're going to use different muscles. And, after the first day and you get off and you think, oh, that didn't know I had a muscle there. But knowing that, I still have 5 more days of this. Those are things to really take into consideration, because you're most likely going to ride a horse that's a different shape or build than the one you're used to at home, different saddles, lots to take into consideration. Now, with your rides, you do a variety of half day or overnight treks and those kind of things. Do you provide a kind of a checklist for your guests, that certain things that they have to kind of to qualify them for their rides?
No, I mean, we ask people to kind of give me, I'm asking them to give me a kind of idea about how good their riding level is. So I have a scale where they can say, okay, I'm on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 rider. So I know roughly what to expect. And I would say for beginners or riders who are not very much up to in shape, I would always recommend a stationary program versus a point-to-point ride, a horse trail or horse safari. Because these are so much easier, because you're right, being in the saddle the whole day is tiring, and it is demanding on the body, on your physique, on your fitness, for all these reasons you have already mentioned. So I think in order to answer that question, it depends what you want. If you really want to, have the horseback riding as your main aim in a vacation, go for a point-to-point ride, or ride the whole day and ride as much as you can, because if this is the most important thing, if this is what you want to do on your holiday, do it. But if you say, okay, horse riding is great, but I also want to experience other things, I want to also have other experiences, then go for a kind of compromise and do a stationary program, or just, go for something you book yourself, like book yourself a nice hotel and then contact some outfitters and just do a couple of rides, on the go, like here a 2-hour ride and there maybe a half-day ride and maybe then a full-day ride, and then go for a lot of other interesting activities. That's really up to your own preference, I'd say. So we do both. For instance, we do the point-to-point rides mostly, I'd say. I think more than 90% of people do that with us, who come on long term. There's, of course, we have plenty of people who just come for a half-day ride or 2-hour ride. They otherwise probably don't ride much in their vacation. They just think, oh, it's a great idea to do a little bit ride on the side. And then we have a couple of people, they sign up for stationary programs. So these stationary programs are like, as I said, like, on day one, you do a 2-hour morning ride, and then you go back to the city, you do some sightseeing. Then on day 2, you go for a boat ride in the morning and do an afternoon ride. Then day 3, maybe you do a whole day excursion to some of the very nice, interesting sites in the countryside. On day 4, you go for a full day ride inside the wildlife sanctuary nearby and stuff like that. So it's really a bit of a mix, and I always keep it a little bit according to the personal preference of the riders and the personal, how much they want to ride, how much they can ride. Sometimes I have people, they had health issues and said, well, I just cannot spend the whole day in the saddle anymore. I can only do 2 hours or maybe 4 hours max. Depends on the saddle and on the stirrups and stuff like that. So then it's really better to do something like this. And plus, I mean, most countries are so interesting. Riding them is a great way of seeing them, but you can also discover them in many other ways. So sometimes it's a good thing to kind of compromise, to kind of say, okay, I do like 3 days point-to-point riding, and then I do a couple of days sightseeing, or I really do a couple of other activities as well. If you go to a beach location, it's great to have just a half day off somewhere in between to lie at the beach, enjoy the sun, soak a little bit and just enjoy the water, swim, snorkel, whatever, and maybe do another day of doing some diving or sailing or surfing or whatever. There's so many beautiful sports, and I always, if I go to another place, I'd always love to do a lot of different things. I am somebody who always loves to experience new stuff. So horse riding is really great. It's one of my favorite hobbies, and well, it's my job, it's my everything, but that doesn't mean it's the only thing in the world for me. So I love doing, I dive, I have done a bit of sailing in between, I love to swim, I love to ski. So there's so many interesting things. So I think it's always good to experience something on the side as well, rather than just going for the riding.
Well, I really agree with you on all of that, there is so much to see and so much to do when you're traveling. And it is interesting coming from North America. Both Canada and the United States are such big countries that really you can't in a few days see the whole place. But in Europe, even though the countries seem small, they're still fairly big. Like France is still a fairly big country. Spain is a fairly big country. Even Ireland, that is, when you look on the map, it looks pretty small. But I spent, just about 10 days there. And, I did a base day ride, but each day we went a different direction. And halfway through the ride, we had a day off. It was like the horses had rest day, and off we went and saw some sights. And it was kind of a nice little break for we had been riding, saw some great things, had some amazing gallops on beaches. But then it was nice to have that little day off in the middle. Now, on a previous ride that I had done in Spain, day 2 in the morning, I hurt myself, fully 100% my own fault. I rode that day we only rode to like mid-afternoon. By that evening, I knew there was no way that I was going to be able to ride the next day. For the morning anyways. And it was a point-to-point ride. And I thought, what am I going to do? Like, I have to, I can't ride. I'd hurt my back. What am I going to do? And the guide we had was fantastic. She's like, oh, well, we'll just figure it out. And they ponied my horse for the morning. And I rested and took some medicine and met them after lunch and got on. And we had a slower afternoon, took a little longer. But I eased back into it. But, you know, with that opportunity, if I hadn't have been able to ride and we were on this point, I would have basically just had to have gone to the end point and waited for my group to get there. So, you know, those are kind of some things to think about when, you know, looking at a point-to-point versus a base stay. I do fall into, I like the base stay ones. That's my choice. Just simply you get to unpack once, and each night you know where you're sleeping versus the point-to-point where you're like, okay, and what's this hotel going to bring us? But that is my choice. Now, I think the question, I didn't look to see where the gal was from, but I suspect she's from North America. Part of her question was, well, how long do you go for? When you're traveling from North America to Europe or Asia, you know, it's a full day of traveling. I would probably recommend a minimum of a week-long ride, whether or not that's 7 days of actual riding. But, you know, between riding and half days and having, you know, a break in the middle, that's probably, you know, a good starting point, because, you know, you're spending all that money to get to, you know, whether you're going to Paris or going into Italy or Ireland, wherever, you know, you're spending all that time to get there. You might as well, you know, enjoy it while you're there and take the week-long ride. I think on average, most of the rides are between that 6 and 8 days for the, regardless if it's a base stay or a point-to-point. There are some little shorter stay ones. But again, if you're traveling from North America to Europe, you're going to want to do something a little bit longer.
Yeah, I can second that. I would even go and say rather go for a minimum of 10 days, if possible 2 weeks, because particularly if you fly through different time zones, because if you fly and you have like a time difference of a couple of hours, usually it starts with about 3.5 hours that you realize it. And when it's more than 5 to 6 hours that you really feel the need to adapt. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot of traveling between Germany and India. That's 3.5 or 4.5 hours of time difference. So when I travel to Germany from India, it doesn't really affect me so much because Germany is behind India. So that means I gain a couple of hours. So that's kind of fine, because I mean, I'm tired in the evening, but I get up early in the morning, and that's my schedule usually. But when I travel backwards, it takes me really 2 weeks to fully adapt back to Indian time and get up as early as I like to. And you need at least a day to adjust longer periods of time difference, or sometimes 2 days if it's really like 9, 10, 12 hours. Mm-hmm. If you're coming from the US somewhere and going to India, or going somewhere to Asia, it just takes time to adjust to that time difference, and you're bound to feel groggy, you're bound to feel tired. Mm-hmm. So it's always good, take this extra day, also kind of plan it in a way that you have maybe a day in advance before you start out on your ride. Just, you know, many outfitters will offer you to arrive a day early. They sometimes even offer you a free ride if you feel up to it, if it works out for them. We do that, for instance. If my guests arrive a day early, I'm happy, because I can already check how they are with the horse without having the group situation. I can just talk to them a little bit without having the whole group there, and I can see, okay, well, they're good riders, maybe they'll manage with the horse. Or so that is always a good idea, to arrive a day early. Have this just one extra night you can sleep. You don't need to get up, because most of the rides you have to get up early in the morning. Most of the times you start, depends of course a little bit where you go, but particularly in hot countries, there's a lot of rides, they start at 6 o'clock, right? So that means you have to be up at the crack of dawn. And if you are still, you know, not in the proper time zone, and you cannot go to sleep in the evening, and you feel really tired in the morning, it just makes it so much more difficult. So I always say, if you travel through a lot of time zones, try to make it 10 days. At least try to keep a day before, mm-hmm. arrive a day before your safari, before your trail ride. And also when you go back, keep one day. don't make it the way that you arrive and you have to work the next day. Keep one day as a rest time in between your vacation and your work. It gives you so much of peace, of peace of mind as well. You have time to unpack in peace. You have time to do that, washing machine, and putting things in order, go for your groceries and stuff, and you just don't have the tension and that you have to go straight back to work, that you don't have time to do groceries, and it just makes things so much easier, and it keeps that holiday, that recreation, it keeps it so much longer.
Right, because you don't, like, sometimes when you come back in, you're rushed. It's like, I need a vacation from my vacation. I need a couple of days rest.
Exactly.
I think they actually, I've heard that when you, with jet lag, now, for myself traveling to Europe, I seem to be able to go, when I fly to Europe, usually by the next day I'm fine. But coming home, the jet lag just kicks my butt. I have heard that it takes a day for every hour that you were out of the time zone. So for example, for myself to Germany is 8 hours. So, you come home, well, that's 8 days to get really back into your regular sleeping patterns. I remember I went to Australia quite a few years ago and came home. I was an old teenager then, and I came home and tried to go to sleep, and the one night my dad came into the kitchen. There I'm making something to eat, and he's like, it's 3 a.m, and I'm like, well, my brain just wasn't, I was definitely in that time zone jet lag
Still
warp.
another time zone.
Yeah. So these are, these are some really great tips for our listeners. Knowing, yes, you may only ride for 6 days, but planning, 2 days in the front, 2 days in the back. Sometimes, some people just want 1 day on the return so they can have an extra day at home to get back into sync. But, having, when you're doing your research on where you wanting to go, whether it's, everywhere, and every time we talk, I come up with a new place that I want to go to. But budget in your time with, okay, so I'm going to fly into Frankfurt, but my ride starts 2 hours away. Well, then now you need to budget. Maybe on the day you go home, maybe you have to stay in that city the night before to catch your flight. So make sure you're adding in those kind of days and that kind of stuff. But my personal preference is the base day. I like being able to unpack, whereas some of my girlfriends love that, each day is a new adventure. Where are we going to end up? What's the hotel going to be like? Or sometimes even, the camping or the old, castle that you get to stay in. And even if it's just for one night, those things can be pretty exciting too. I really, I so much look forward to these Q&A episodes. I like how we can engage with our listeners, answer their questions. And I hope that we get lots more questions so we can have a lot more Q&A episodes. Do you have any sign-off tips on, ways to save money, or, what your preference is for a base day, long stay?
I love my trails. I'm an explorer person. I love to be at a different place each day, each night. I love to go from places to place. And I'm a person who would always rather pack so many things in the vacation that, as you said, I need a vacation from the vacation afterwards. I mean, of course, it's a learning experience. And I am in the lucky position that my work is where other people make vacations. So I wouldn't say I'm always on vacation, but I do love to guide these rides. And for me, they're just so great. But yeah, I do love to go from place to place. And yeah, no more tips from my side. I think we covered pretty much, pretty extensively. And it was great talking to you. I think it was two very good questions. And well, as you can hear, we are very, very much into these topics. And I mean, Heather is a professional, I'm a professional in that field. So go ahead, send us your questions, and we're always happy to do another Q&A, and we'll schedule it as soon as possible so that you can get the answers to your questions quickly, and you can just plan your next, hopefully it will help you plan your next horse riding vacations in a better and a more efficient way.
Well, thanks so much for listening to our podcast today. On behalf of Uta and myself, we look forward to you joining us again soon. If you liked the show, please hit the subscribe button, as we don't want you to miss any episodes. If you'd like to give us some feedback or suggest a topic for a future show, please send us an email via our Facebook page, or send us an email, or simply leave us a review on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher. The greater reviews we receive, the more like-minded people can find our show. And don't forget to check out all the great things on our equestrian-adventuresses website. So many great things on there. Our end goal is to provide you with all the information you need to feel confident to go out on your own equestrian adventure. So until next time, adventuresses, happy trails.
Happy trails from my side. So long, and have a lovely day.